In this lesson, we'll talk about how margins work and how we use them in CSS. In our previous lesson, we learned how padding works. We created some space between our border and our element. What happens if we wanted to create a little bit of space in between multiple components on our web page? Say you have two pictures exactly right beside each other. They're both framed and bordered nicely. But imagine that their sides are touching each other. We want to pull them apart and give them a little space in between. In order to do this in HTML, we'll have to introduce a topic we call margins. Margins are the space outside the borders of an element. Taking a look at the diagram here, we can see that the margin is the purple area that exists outside the blue area, which is the border of the element. Defining the margin is fairly simple, as in an element you have 4 sides, and the margin has a property for each side too: margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left. Each of the margin properties can have these values: auto, which the browser automatically and reflexively calculates the size of the margin depending on the size of the browser window; length, which you can tell the browser to define a fixed size of your margin in pixels or points; percentages, which takes the percentage of the width of the containing element; and inherit, which specifies that the margin should inherit from a parent element. You should also note that a margin cannot have a negative value. We're creating some space when working with margins, so negative space wouldn't make much sense. Here is an example of the margin using values in pixels. If you want to use the margin property instead of defining margin top, margin bottom, margin left, and margin right, you can specifically just use the margin property itself. The margin property, as you can see in the code here, takes the value of margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left in that order. Here is an example of how that would work. You can see that the margin property is being used in the body container. Just like in the previous lesson borders, margin, it also takes the same approach when using multiple values. When using the values, I like to remember it as this: 4 values would associate with top right and bottom left. 3 values would associate with top, sides, and bottom. 2 values would associate with top, bottom, and then the sides. 1 value would associate with all of the sides. Here's an example of a margin using 2 values. The top and bottom creates a space of 50 pixels, and the sides are a space of 10 pixels. For further learning, please head over to the assignment section on Replit. It'll give you another great practice activity and further instruction on how CSS margins work.